Arthur Pendleton had not slept. He stood at the bathroom mirror at 5:47 in the morning, pressing a cold, damp cloth to the dark hollows beneath his eyes, watching his own reflection as though it belonged to a stranger. The man staring back at him looked older than 34. His dark brown hair was rumpled, his jaw rough with 3 days of stubble he hadn't found time to shave, and there was a particular kind of exhaustion etched into the lines around his mouth that had nothing to do with ordinary tiredness. It was the specific, bone-deep fatigue of a man who had spent the night listening for the sound of a child struggling to breathe. From down the short hallway of their apartment, a 2-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of a building in the Kinslow district that smelled vaguely of old paint and someone else's cooking, he could hear the soft, shallow rhythm of Lily's breathing. It was steadier now. Better. The nebulizer treatment at 2 in the morning had helped, and by 4 she had finally fallen back into a restless sleep with her small fist curled beneath her chin, her dark lashes fanned against her pale cheeks. He checked on her before he left. He always did. She was still sleeping, her yellow blanket pulled up to her chin, the same worn yellow blanket she'd had since the orphanage, the fabric faded and soft from years of washing. On the nightstand beside her, catching the gray morning light from the window, lay the silver locket. A swan in mid-flight, its wings spread wide, the chain pooled in a small silver heap. She never slept with it on. She'd learned, at 5 years old, that chains could be dangerous in the night. But she never let it leave her sight, either. Arthur pressed a kiss to her forehead, so gently she didn't stir. "I'll be back by 6, he whispered. "Mrs. Garrity will come at 8. He locked the door behind him, checked it twice, and descended the stairs with his worn leather briefcase in one hand and a travel mug of lukewarm coffee in the other. His shoes, black Oxford lace-ups he bought 3 years ago, had a crack across the left toe that he'd filled twice with shoe polish. They were the only formal shoes he owned. He was 43 minutes late to Vance Analytics Group when he finally swiped his key card at the elevator bank on the 14th floor. The open plan office was already humming with the low, efficient noise of 100 keyboards and carefully moderated conversations. Arthur moved through it quickly, keeping his head down, his jaw set. He knew how late it was. He didn't need the looks to remind him. The raised eyebrow from the receptionist, the deliberate non-acknowledgement from the cluster of analysts near the coffee station. He settled into his desk, a cramped workspace at the far end of the analytics wing, and immediately pulled up the quarterly risk model he'd been building for the past 3 weeks. It was good work. It was, if he was being honest with himself, excellent work, the kind of model that would have earned any other analyst at Vance a commendation and a raise. He had emailed a preliminary draft to Marcus Thorne, his direct supervisor, 10 days ago, and received nothing in reply. He'd sent the final version 2 days after that. Still nothing. He had learned not to think too hard about that. Marcus Thorne was 40 years old, silver-haired, and possessed of the particular brand of easy confidence that came from never having been seriously challenged by anyone who couldn't fire him. He occupied the corner office at the head of the analytics wing with a sense of permanence, as though the room had been architecturally designed around his personality. He was well liked by the senior partners, charming in meetings, and brilliant in the specific way that a man is brilliant when he is very good at recognizing other people's good ideas and presenting them as his own. Arthur had known this for 2 years. He had done nothing about it, because Arthur had Lily, and Lily had medical bills, and the health insurance provided by Vance Analytics Group was the single most important thing in their lives. He was 19 minutes into recalibrating a data set when Marcus appeared. He didn't knock. He never knocked. He came to stand at the edge of Arthur's workspace with his hands in his pockets and a look on his face that managed to be simultaneously bored and pleased with itself. "You're late again," Marcus said, not quietly. He had a way of saying things at precisely the volume required to ensure that the 3 nearest desks could hear him. Arthur did not look up from his screen. "My daughter had an asthma attack last night. I notified HR this morning per protocol." Marcus picked up a printed report from the edge of Arthur's desk, one of Arthur's own reports, and turned it over without reading it. "That's the 3rd time this month. The 2nd. The first was a doctor's appointment." Arthur paused, then added, "Carefully, which I also documented." Marcus set the report down with a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Eleanor Vance is in the building today. She's doing a floor review. You know how she is." He let that sit for a moment. I'd hate for your attendance issues to reflect badly on the whole team." After he walked away, Arthur sat very still for a moment, his hands flat on either side of his keyboard. Then he exhaled slowly, opened the risk model, and went back to work. He had heard the name Eleanor Vance spoken 100 times in the 4 years he had worked at VAG, always in hushed, slightly reverent tones, the way people speak of a distant and all-powerful force of nature. She had founded the company at 24, had built it from a 2-person startup in a borrowed office into one of the most profitable analytics firms on the Eastern Seaboard. She was 32 years old. She was, by every account, brilliant and ruthless in equal measure, and she ran her company the way a surgeon runs an operating room, with total, unsparing precision. Arthur had never spoken to her. He was not the kind of employee who warranted speaking to. He learned later, when the pieces of the day assembled themselves into a shape he could recognize, that Marcus had gone to her office at 9:15. He didn't know what was said in that meeting, though he could have guessed at the broad strokes. He didn't know that Marcus had laid a carefully curated folder on Eleanor Vance's desk, a record of every late arrival, every early departure, every missed meeting, compiled with the diligence of a man who had been building a case for months. What he knew was that at 10:34 in the morning, the office went very quiet. He looked up from his screen. People were finding reasons to look at their keyboards, at their phones, at the middle distance of the opposite wall. The elevator had opened, and Eleanor Vance was walking through the office. She was taller than he'd expected. She wore a charcoal gray suit that fit her with the kind of architectural precision that cost more money than Arthur made in a month, and her dark hair was pulled back from a face that was composed, still, and utterly unreadable. She did not smile. She did not greet anyone. She moved through the space as though she owned it, which she did, and her gray eyes swept the room with the calm, measuring quality of someone performing an assessment, not a visit. She was carrying a white envelope. Arthur understood, in some wordless, animal way, before she had taken 3 steps in his direction. He felt the understanding settle into his chest like a stone dropped into still water. He did not look away. He made himself stay perfectly still and watch her come. She placed the white envelope on his desk with the deliberate, unhurried care of someone who has performed this action before. "Pack your things, Arthur." Her voice was cool and precise, carrying easily in the sudden, hell-breath silence of the office. It was not loud. It didn't need to be. "You are done here." He looked at the envelope. He looked at her face. Her expression told him nothing, less than nothing, the polished blankness of a woman who had learned, very early and very thoroughly, how not to feel things in rooms full of other people. "Ms. Vance," he started. "The letter details everything. HR will handle the formal process." She was already turning away, as though the matter were closed, as though he were already gone. "I have a daughter." The words came out quiet, without heat, without pleading. A statement of fact. "She has asthma. She was in the hospital last month. I've never missed a deadline, and every absence has been documented and approved." Eleanor paused, just barely. If he hadn't been watching her so closely, he might have missed it, the almost imperceptible stiffening of her shoulders, a fractional hesitation before she turned back to face him. "I'm aware that everyone has circumstances," she said. "This company's policy exists to ensure fairness for all employees. Yours is not the only case. You've been flagged repeatedly by Marcus." He said it without inflection. "I've been flagged repeatedly by Marcus, who, I would note, submitted my quarterly risk model to the senior partners last week under his own name." Something moved behind her eyes, quickly, and then gone. "That is a serious accusation," she said. "Yes," Arthur agreed. "It is." Another silence. He reached across his desk and began, with steady hands, to open the small drawer on the left side. He removed what was there. A spare inhaler he kept for emergencies, a photograph in a frame, a handwritten note on yellow paper that said, "Daddy, I drew you a star love lily," folded into quarters and soft with handling. He placed these items in his briefcase. He was not hurried about it, and he was not ashamed, and the stillness with which he moved seemed to unsettle the watching office far more than tears would have. Then his briefcase caught the edge of the desk, and the photograph frame toppled. It clattered face up on the desk surface, and Eleanor Vance, who was 4 feet away and had not yet made herself leave, looked down at it. The breath left her body. The photograph showed a small girl of perhaps 4 years old, laughing, her dark hair wild around her face, her eyes bright and crinkled with delight at some moment the camera had caught and held. She wore a yellow dress, and in her hand, held up toward the camera as though presenting a treasure, was a silver locket on a delicate chain. A swan, wings spread. Mid-flight, Eleanor felt the floor shift beneath her. She knew that locket. She knew it the way you know the sound of your own heartbeat, without looking, without thinking, in some place in the body that exists below the reach of reason. She had held it in her hands on the coldest night of her life, in a hospital bathroom with fluorescent lights and a cracked tile above the sink, and she had fastened it around the neck of a newborn girl who was so impossibly small that the chain hung to her sternum, and she had said, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry," like a prayer she knew wasn't being answered. The girl in the photograph was 5 years old. The office door creaked open. It was a small sound, but in the silence it was enormous. Every head in the room turned. Arthur turned. Eleanor turned. A child stood in the doorway. She was 5 years old. She wore a yellow dress, faded at the hem. Her dark hair was in two uneven pigtails that were coming loose, and she had been sleeping recently. There was still the soft crease of a pillow on her cheek. She clutched the silver swan locket in both hands, holding it against her chest, and she looked across the office with wide, slightly uncertain eyes until she found Arthur. Her face broke into relief. "Daddy." She crossed to him naturally, immediately, the way children move toward their North Star, and Arthur dropped to one knee and gathered her in with a gentleness that made several people in the office find sudden reason to examine their monitors very closely. "Hey, sweetheart." His voice was steady, even now. "I told Mrs. Garrity to call before bringing you in." "She tried," Lily said seriously, "but your phone went to voicemail. So she brought me." She tilted her head and looked up at Arthur's face with the careful, knowing attention that sick children develop early. "Are you in trouble, Daddy?" "Everything is fine," he told her. "Everything is fine." Then Lily looked past him. She looked at Eleanor Vance, who was standing very still 4 feet away, and something happened in the child's expression, something quiet and ancient and impossible to explain. Not recognition exactly, not the recognition of a face she had seen before. Something else, an orientation, a finding of north. Lily's small hand came up and touched the locket at her chest. "Mom," she whispered. The word was barely audible. A breath, a question, but the silence in the office was such that everyone heard it. Eleanor Vance did not move. She stood as though she had been struck, her composure crumbling in a way that was visible even to those who didn't know what they were watching. A fracture beginning at the eyes, spreading, irreversible. Her hand came up to cover her mouth. Her briefcase hit the floor. She made a sound that was not quite a word, not quite a breath, and then she turned and walked, with rapid and uncharacteristic near stumbling, toward the exit. The office watched her go in stunned silence. Arthur stayed on one knee, holding Lily, and looked at the door where Eleanor had disappeared. The elevator doors closed around Eleanor, and she pressed herself against the back wall and breathed. In and out, in and out. The numbers descended, 14, 13, 12, and by the time the lobby swallowed her, her driver was already waiting at the curb. She got in without speaking, and when Franklin, who had been driving her for 6 years and knew better than most when not to ask questions, said nothing and simply pulled out into traffic, she was grateful in a way she couldn't have articulated. She didn't go to her penthouse. She went to the apartment she kept in the old part of the city, the one she'd bought 8 years ago when she'd first had money and had believed, for a brief and credulous time, that having money would make the specific ache she carried easier to bear. The apartment had high ceilings and tall windows, and she had furnished it carefully but had never truly lived in it, because she had never truly lived anywhere since she was 18 years old. She sat on the floor with her back against the wall beneath the window, still in her charcoal suit, her shoes abandoned by the door, and she let herself come apart. She had not cried like this in years. She cried like someone who had been saving it, storing it in some locked and lightless room inside herself, and the room had burst open. She pressed her hands over her face, and she cried until her throat hurt, until the light in the room shifted from morning white to afternoon gold, until she was simply wrung out and quiet, sitting in the settling dust of herself. After a while, she got up. She washed her face. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror for a long time with the flat, clear gaze of a woman deciding something. Then she picked up her phone and called Daniel Marsh. Daniel Marsh was the best private investigator in the city. He had done work for Eleanor twice before, corporate matters, impeccably handled, no loose ends. He answered on the second ring. "I need a complete background on Arthur Pendleton," she said. "An employee of mine. I need everything. His wife, the adoption, the child. I need to know how they found her and what her life has been." A pause. Timeline. Yesterday. Daniel called her back in 14 hours. She listened to the whole report without speaking. Sitting at the kitchen counter with a cup of tea she didn't drink going cold in front of her. The file was thorough. Daniel was always thorough. Arthur James Pendleton, raised in Portland by a schoolteacher mother, degree in economics from a state university, top of his class. Met Sarah Coleman at 26, married at 28. No children of their own. Sarah had been found, after 2 years of trying, to have a condition that made biological pregnancy very unlikely. They had begun the adoption process together and had brought home a 6-month-old girl from Whitmore House Children's Home in the winter of 2020. Her file had listed her as Baby Jane. They had named her Lily. Sarah Pendleton had been diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer when Lily was 18 months old. She had died at 31, 2 years later, on a Tuesday in March, in the bedroom of their apartment, with Arthur holding her hand and Lily asleep in the next room. Arthur had not remarried. He had not dated, as far as Daniel's contacts could determine. He had worked. He had taken his daughter to her appointments and stayed up through her nights and packed her lunches and braided her hair badly and been present, with the whole of himself, in every available way. Eleanor sat with this for a long time. Then came the second part of the report, the corporate portion, and this was where the ugliness lived. In the 4 years Arthur had been at Vance Analytics Group, he had produced some of the finest work in his department. 3 models, including the quarterly risk assessment she had seen referenced in his file, had been submitted to the Senior Partner Review Board under Marcus Thorne's name. One of these, a market exposure analysis that had directly informed 2 major investment decisions, had earned Marcus a year-end bonus of $40,000. Arthur had received nothing. There was more. A pattern of documentation, carefully constructed, selective, thorough, that Marcus had been building for at least 8 months. Every late arrival recorded. No context provided. Not the overnight in the hospital. Not the appointment with the pulmonologist. Not a single one of the mitigating circumstances that Arthur had documented through proper HR channels. Marcus had gone to Eleanor with a curated file, and she had acted on it without asking a single question. She had fired a man who spent his nights keeping his daughter alive. She had fired the man who was raising her child. Eleanor closed the file. She sat in the silence of the apartment for a very long time. "I am sorry," she thought, but not to Arthur, not yet. To a 6-month-old girl with no name, lying in a plastic bassinet with a silver locket against her chest. To an 18-year-old girl sitting on a bench outside a hospital on a December night with nothing to her name and nowhere to go and a decision to make that she had never, in 14 years, allowed herself to fully face. She had told herself, then, that it was the only choice. That love could mean letting go. That Lily, though she hadn't been named Lily yet, hadn't been named at all, had been nothing yet but weight and warmth and a smell like the inside of something pure, would find people who could give her what Eleanor couldn't. She had been right. She had always known she had been right. That did not make it less terrible. Eleanor Vance returned to Vance Analytics Group on a Tuesday morning at 7:58, 2 minutes before the official workday began, wearing a black suit that felt like armor. Her assistant, Claire, took one look at her face and left a black coffee at her office door without being asked. She called Marcus Thorne in at 9:00. He came in smiling, unhurried, with the mild and confident air of a man who believes himself to be in favor. He sat down across from her desk and crossed one leg over the other and said, "Good morning, Eleanor. I take it you've processed the Pendleton situation." "I have," she said. "I've also processed several other things." She opened the folder on her desk. "I've been reviewing the departmental output records for the past 4 years. In particular, the authorship and submission records for models produced under your direct supervision." She looked up. "Would you like to tell me about the March risk analysis?" The smile on Marcus's face didn't disappear immediately. It diminished in stages, like a light being slowly dimmed. I'm not sure what you mean. I think you are, Eleanor said. I have the original draft files, Marcus, with creation dates and authorship metadata. I have the email chain in which Arthur Pendleton sent you a completed model on March 9th. I have the submission you made to the senior partners on March 14th, under your name, with no attribution. She paused. I have 3 instances of this. Would you like to keep pretending, or shall we move along? Marcus was a man who had spent 20 years perfecting the art of plausible deniability. He rallied. Collaboration is a normal part of management. I reviewed, refined, you submitted other people's work as your own and collected bonuses for it. Eleanor's voice was still perfectly level. That's not collaboration. That's theft. She closed the folder. I've also had our compliance team review the analytics department expense accounts for the past 36 months. The discrepancies are significant. The color had left Marcus's face entirely. You have until the end of business today to provide a voluntary written account of your conduct. She said it the way she said everything, without heat, without triumph, with the clean, surgical precision that was both her greatest professional asset and, she was beginning to understand, a quality she had allowed to calcify into something far colder than efficiency. Our legal team will be in contact. You are suspended with immediate effect, pending investigation. She stood. Please leave your key card with security on your way out. Marcus stood. The look on his face cycled through disbelief and outrage before settling into something harder, the affronted fury of a man who has never seriously believed the rules applied to him. You can't. I can, she said simply. And I have. He left. Eleanor listened to the sound of his footsteps receding down the hallway. His last footsteps in these halls, as it turned out, because the compliance investigation that followed was comprehensive and unambiguous, and she felt something cold and hard inside her chest loosen, very slightly, like ice beginning to thaw. She had Marcus's replacement in the analytics department briefed by noon. She scheduled a full departmental meeting for 2 p.m., at which she personally acknowledged, without naming the specific individuals involved, that structural irregularities in performance reporting and attribution had been identified and were being addressed, and that she was committed to ensuring that merit, actual merit, documented and verifiable, would determine how people were treated and rewarded in this company. People looked at each other, understanding without needing things spelled out. Then she pulled up Arthur Pendleton's numbered. He answered on the 4th ring. His voice was guarded, not rude, but precise, careful in the way of a man who has learned to be careful about unexpected contact. Mr. Pendleton, this is Eleanor Vance. A pause. I know who this is. I'm calling to offer you your position back, with full back pay for the days you've missed, a formal written apology from this company for the manner of your dismissal, and a promotion to senior analyst with a salary increase of 32%. She paused. Marcus Thorne has been suspended and is under investigation. The models he submitted as his own work have been correctly attributed, and you will receive retroactive compensation for the bonuses that should have been allocated to you. Another pause. Longer this time. Mr. Pendleton, I need to think about it, he said. She had expected this. She didn't push. Of course. Take the time you need. The offer stands. He hung up. 3 days later, he called back. The answer is no. His voice was steady. I appreciate the offer. But I don't want to work for a company where the processes are built to make people like me invisible. Now while my daughter needs me to be available, I'll find something else. She had expected this too. I understand, she said. And then, more quietly, Ms. Vance. What my daughter said to you in the office, I don't know what she thought she saw. She gets confused sometimes, with strangers who remind her of. He paused. She lost her mother 3 years ago. A silence. I know, Eleanor said. Another silence, this one different in quality, denser, more freighted. Have a good evening, Mr. Pendleton, Eleanor said, and gently ended the call. She had not changed into someone different. She was not, by temperament or history, a person who found it easy to be humble. But Eleanor Vance had spent 2 weeks in the company of her own conscience, which was as unsparing as the rest of her, and had arrived at a specific, uncomfortable understanding that there was no amount of money that addressed what she owed this man, and that the things he actually needed were things that money could not buy and could only awkwardly approximate. She did what she always did when confronted with a problem that required capabilities she didn't yet have. She started small. The first thing was the medical bills. Lily had had a pulmonologist appointment on the 10th, a prescription refill on the 14th. Eleanor's lawyer, who handled her charitable giving and asked no unnecessary questions, arranged an anonymous contribution through a foundation that paid directly into a medical assistance account. Arthur would see a credit on the billing portal. It wouldn't tell him where it came from. The second thing was harder. She asked Claire to find the address of an apartment in the Kinslow district. She went on a Thursday afternoon, in jeans she'd bought specifically for the purpose and a gray coat that was expensive but plain enough to be unremarkable. She walked through the neighborhood with her hands in her pockets and looked at things. The playground at the corner of Morrow and 5th, the bakery with the hand-lettered sign in the window, the elementary school on the end of the block with children's drawings taped in the glass, the laundromat where a man was folding a very small yellow dress with the careful attention of someone for whom a yellow dress is a significant object. She saw him before he saw her. She kept walking. She came back the following Thursday, and the Thursday after that. She told herself it was information gathering. She told herself she was trying to understand the context of Lily's life, the shape of the world her daughter had grown up in. This was true, partly, but it was also true that she came back because the neighborhood, with its uneven sidewalks and the smell of the bakery and the children's noise from the playground, had a quality she was not accustomed to encountering in her daily life. It felt inhabited, human in a way that her glass-walled office and her silent penthouse were not done on her third visit. She was sitting on a bench near the playground when Lily came running from the direction of the swings. Arthur was behind her, moving at the unhurried pace of a man who had learned to be always within arm's reach without being always in the way. Lily stopped in front of the bench. She looked at Eleanor with the direct, serious attention of a 5-year-old who has not yet learned to look at strangers with suspicion. "You have sad eyes," Lily said. Eleanor blinked. "Do I? My daddy has sad eyes sometimes too." Lily tilted her head. "His go away when he laughs. Do yours?" Eleanor opened her mouth and found, to her considerable surprise, that she had no answer to this. Arthur arrived at the bench. He looked at the woman his daughter was talking to, and his expression did several things in quick succession. First, the polite blankness of a parent managing a social interaction, then a sharper recognition, then something complicated and cautious, and not quite anger. "Lily." His voice was quiet. "She has sad eyes, Daddy. I told her. I heard." He looked at Eleanor steadily. "Ms. Vance." "Mr. Pendleton." She held his gaze. "I'm not here to cause any trouble. I was walking through the Kinslow playground," he said, without inflection. "Yes." A silence in which they looked at each other, and in which Lily, apparently satisfied with the state of affairs, went back to the swings. "She needs her rescue inhaler," Eleanor said, looking at the playground. "The humidity today is above 73%. The general recommendations for pediatric asthma management suggest," she stopped herself, breathed. "I'm sorry. I'm very bad at this." Arthur studied her for a long moment. "What exactly are you bad at?" he asked. "Everything I'm trying to do right now," she said honestly. He sat down on the bench, not next to her, but not far away either. Not because he trusted her, but perhaps because he was tired, and the bench was there, and Lily was on the swings being precisely and audibly 5 years old, and the late afternoon light was very warm in the Kinslow district, and some moments are simply too large and quiet for continued standing. "She needs her inhaler on days above 70% humidity," he said, after a while. "I already gave it to her before we left." He paused. "She always needs it on Thursdays. I don't know why. I've stopped trying to figure out why." Eleanor looked at him. Then she looked at Lily on the swings, pumping her legs, her head thrown back, her pigtails flying. "She's extraordinary," Eleanor said, quietly, not sentimentally, as a simple statement of fact. "Yeah," Arthur said, "she is." They sat on the bench in the late afternoon sun, not quite together, not quite strangers. Watching the extraordinary girl fly.it was the kind of rain that comes without courtesy. No warning thunder, no gradual darkening, just a sudden and total surrender of the sky. One moment the afternoon was overcast but navigable, and the next the streets were rivers and visibility had collapsed to the length of an outstretched arm. But Arthur's phone rang at 3:47 p.m. It was the front desk of Lily's school. The message was brief and sufficient. Lily had had an episode in the classroom during reading time. Mild to moderate. They'd administered her emergency inhaler, but the school nurse wanted her seen. He was already in his car. The second-hand Volvo he bought for its safety rating and maintained with the vigilance of a man who knows it is the only car he will have for a very long time. When the engine gave a single decisive cough and stopped, he tried it 3 times. The rain hammered the windshield. He got out and stood on the curb for approximately 30 seconds before making the decision to run. He was 2 blocks from the school, soaked through, when a black car pulled up beside him and the rear door opened. "Get in," Eleanor said. He didn't have time to ask questions or decide how he felt about this, or make any of the rational objections that would have been entirely available to him under different circumstances. He got in. "Lily," Eleanor said, already on her phone. "At school. Asthma." She gave her driver a single address. He didn't need to be told twice. They made it to the school in 4 minutes. Lily was in the front office with the school nurse, sitting on a cot with her rescue inhaler in her lap and the silver locket held tight in her fist, her eyes wide and frightened and lighting up when she saw Arthur come through the door. "Daddy." She held her arms up. He had her in his arms before the word finished, and Eleanor stood in the doorway of the school office in her soaked coat and watched the 2 of them. The man folding around the child with her face pressed to his neck, both of them breathing with the careful relief of 2 people who had been scared, and something inside her, which had been held in suspension for 5 years, shifted in ways she couldn't yet name. The school nurse recommended they get Lily to her. "Doctor." Eleanor's car took them directly. They sat in the waiting room of the pediatric pulmonology clinic on Rubble Street. Arthur with Lily half asleep against his shoulder, Eleanor 2 seats away with her hands folded and her coat beginning to dry, and waited. Lily was seen for 40 minutes. The verdict was that the attack had been moderate and was now managed, that they should monitor her closely overnight, and that they should consider whether her current medication protocol needed adjustment. Arthur nodded with the fluency of a man who has learned the vocabulary of his daughter's illness the way some men learn a foreign language, out of necessity, thoroughly, until it becomes second nature. When they came out, Lily was sleepy and small, leaning against her father's side. She looked at Eleanor. "You came," she said. "I happened to be nearby," Eleanor said. Lily considered this with the solemn, evaluative gaze that was simply her default mode of engaging with the world. "You have a nice car," she said finally, and then closed her eyes against Arthur's shoulder. They waited while Arthur called Mrs. Garrity. They waited while the prescription was processed at the clinic pharmacy. They sat in a row of chairs under flat institutional light, the 3 of them, and the rain beat against the clinic windows, and Eleanor sat with the knowledge of everything she had not said pressing against her sternum like a closed fist. She had not planned for this evening. She had not planned for any of this in the precise sense. She had arrived at it through a series of days in which she had told herself she was simply gathering information, being careful, not ready yet, waiting for the right moment. But there was no right moment. She understood this with sudden, absolute clarity. There was only this moment, a rainy evening in a clinic waiting room, a sleeping child who was her sleeping child, and a man who was doing alone what she had believed she could not do at all. "Arthur," she said that he was looking at Lily. He looked up. "There's something I need to tell you." She paused. This was harder than any boardroom, any negotiation, any cold ultimatum she had ever delivered. "I should have told you sooner. I kept finding reasons not to, because she stopped. Started again. I'm not very good at being afraid. I'm better at being angry, or in control. This is neither of those things." He was watching her steadily. Lily breathed quietly against his shoulder. "The locket," Eleanor said. "The silver swan. I know what it is because I'm the one who put it around her neck." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "In the hospital, when she was 6 hours old. The night I left her at Whitmore House." She looked at Lily, at the small dark head, the pale cheek, the lashes. "I was 18 years old. I was homeless. I had been living in a shelter for 4 months. I had no one and nothing, and she deserved more than nothing. I told myself that. I told myself that for 14 years. The waiting room was quiet around them. From somewhere down the corridor came the distant sound of a children's program playing in a patient room. Arthur had not moved. He was listening with the quality of attention that was. She was learning, Simply the way he listened to everything. Fully, without interruption, without looking away. I built a company, she said. I built it because I thought that if I was successful enough, I could find her. Eventually, when I was worthy of it. When I had something to give her besides an apology. She pressed her hands together in her lap. I never thought she would find me, or that the way she would find me would be because I had just fired her father. Her voice cracked, briefly, on the last word. She steadied it. I know what I did to you. I know what I almost did to her. And I know that whatever I owe you I cannot pay back. But I needed you to know the truth, because you deserve to know it, and because I am. She stopped, took a breath. Because I am her mother, she said. Whatever I ever am or am not, I am that. The rain slid down the windows. Lily slept. Arthur Pendleton looked at Eleanor Vance for a long time, and his expression was unreadable, and then he looked down at the top of his daughter's head. His jaw was very tight, and his eyes, when he closed them briefly, had the look of a man standing at the edge of a significant height, deciding whether to jump. He didn't say anything that night that he thanked Eleanor for the car, for getting them to the clinic quickly, in the careful and complete tones of a man acknowledging a favor precisely without acknowledging anything else. He carried Lily to Eleanor's car when it was time to go home, settled her in the back seat, flicked the seatbelt across her with the automatic tenderness of long practice. He thanked Eleanor again when the car stopped in front of his building. He took Lily upstairs. He sat at the kitchen table after she was in bed and stared at the wall for a while. Then, at 11 p.m., he texted the number Eleanor had called from. I want to talk. Not tonight. This weekend. The reply came immediately, as though she had been waiting, named the time and place. I'll be there. He chose a coffee shop 2 blocks from his apartment. Neutral ground. Public. Contained. Saturday at 10. He arrived first, took a corner table, and ordered coffee he didn't drink. She came in at 9:58, in a plain coat and a quiet sweater, with nothing in her hands and none of her usual polished armor in place. She looked, without it, younger than 32. She sat down. She didn't order anything. She looked at him and waited. I'm angry, he said. He said it simply, as a fact, without elevation. I need you to hear that before anything else. I'm angry at what you did in that office, and I'm angry that I almost lost my job, my insurance, my income, Lily's stability, because of a process that you designed and a person you empowered and a judgment you made without 5 minutes of actual investigation. He paused. I want you to know that the anger is real and that I'm not going to perform graciousness about it. I know, Eleanor said, and I'm angry about the other thing. I'm angry that she could have had. He stopped, pressed his mouth together, began again. I'm angry on her behalf. Not mine. Mine I can manage. But she lost her mother, and she never needed to be missing a mother in the first place, and his voice was steady, but barely. Eleanor said nothing. She absorbed this with the look of a person receiving something they know they've earned. But, Arthur said, after a moment. He looked down at his coffee. I've been thinking about what you were when you made that decision. 18. Alone. Nowhere to go. He looked up. I can be angry about the result and still understand the reason. Those aren't the same thing. Eleanor's eyes were very bright. She was holding herself together by something thin. And I know that whatever you are to my daughter, whatever she is to you, she gets to have an opinion about it too, eventually. She's 5. She called you mom on sight. He exhaled slowly. I don't know what to do with that. I don't know what it means or what it should mean. But I'm not going to make a decision about her life based on my anger. That's not who I am. I know, Eleanor said again. Her voice was very quiet. I know who you are. I had someone look into your life. After the office. I should tell you that. I assumed, he said. I know who you are, she said again. What you've been to her. What you gave up for her. She looked at the table. I am not here to take anything from you. I would never. I could not. She lifted her eyes. I only want. The word want seemed to cost her something significant. I only want to be something to her. Something small. She doesn't need to know the full truth yet. She's 5. But if I could be someone in her life, even just someone who visits, who she knows, an aunt, Arthur said. That's what I've been thinking. For now, while she's young enough that it doesn't need to be complicated. Eleanor blinked. She's already attached to you, he said. I don't know why, and I'm not sure I want to think about it too carefully, but she is. She asks about the lady with the sad eyes. The corner of his mouth moved. That's what she calls you. something cracked open in Eleanor's face. It was the most unguarded expression she had shown him, raw and bright, and completely undefended. "The lady with the sad eyes can come for lunch on Sunday," Arthur said. "If she can manage to be ordinary. Not impressive, not efficient, just ordinary." Eleanor looked at him across the table. This man in his good-bad suit and his cracked shoe, who had every reason to make this as hard as possible and had chosen, with full knowledge of the cost, not to. "I can try," she said. "That," he said, "is all I'm asking." The Sunday lunch started with a small catastrophe involving a bread roll. Lily had been told only that the lady from the playground, the one with the sad eyes, was coming for lunch, and she had received this information with the equanimity of a child who has learned to take the world largely as it comes. She set about drawing a welcome picture with her wax crayons while Arthur made pasta, which was safe and manageable, and which Eleanor could not have made worse. This turned out to be a presumptuous assumption. Eleanor arrived at 12:02 with a bunch of sunflowers, not arranged, not wrapped in expensive florist paper, just a grocery store bunch she had carried on the subway, and a box from the bakery 2 blocks away, containing a loaf of seeded bread, because she had read that children with respiratory conditions did better with high-fiber diets, and bread seemed like a manageable contribution. "You didn't have to bring anything," Arthur said at the door. "I know." She handed him the sunflowers. "I didn't know what else to do with my hands." He put them in a glass on the kitchen counter. It was, by any measure, an extremely ordinary gesture, and it made the apartment look briefly like a different kind of place. Warmer, with the flowers' yellow heads tilting toward the window light. She stood in the kitchen doorway while Arthur finished the pasta, and he gave her things to do. Drain the colander, open the cupboard on the left for bowls. There's a drawer of serving spoons. And she did them with the focused attention of a woman approaching a delicate operation. When Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway and said, "You're cooking," with the mild, interested tone of an inspector arriving on a job site, Eleanor straightened and said, "I'm helping," which was perhaps the most honest thing she'd said in years. After lunch, which was good, because Arthur was a good cook in the practical and unpretentious way of people who have cooked for love rather than impression, Lily produced the welcome drawing. It was 3 figures in wax crayon, rendered in the overlapping, slightly amorphous style of 5-year-old art. 1 tall figure with brown hair and a brown suit, Arthur. 1 small figure in yellow, Lily. And 1 figure on the other side, with dark hair and what appeared to be a gray rectangle for a body, whom Lily identified as the lady. "I put her in our house," Lily explained, pointing to the crayon lines she'd drawn around all 3 figures. "Because she looks cold outside." Eleanor looked at the drawing for a long moment. She opened her mouth, closed it, and said, "Thank you, Lily." "You can keep it," Lily said generously. "I have lots more paper." After Lily went down for her afternoon nap, Eleanor stood in the small kitchen helping Arthur wash up, and the silence between them had the quality, unfamiliar to her, of shared quiet rather than an absence of conversation. "I tried to bake last week," Eleanor said, drying a bowl with careful deliberateness. "Cookies. For a colleague's birthday. How did it go?" "I had to throw the pan away." She paused. The cookies welded to it. He turned to look at her. His expression was, she catalogued it carefully, not unkind. "What recipe did you use?" "I Googled one. It said it was simple." She looked at the bowl in her hands. It was not simple. "What kind of cookies?" "Snickerdoodles." Lily said once she liked them. He turned back to the sink, and when his head was turned, the corner of his mouth did the thing it occasionally did, the small, involuntary movement of a man who is smiling against his better judgment. "Come back next Sunday," he said. "I'll show you how." She came back the next Sunday, and the Sunday after that. She learned to make snickerdoodles, which took 2 attempts and 1 minor smoke alarm incident that Lily found enormously entertaining. She learned that Lily's pigtails needed to start from behind the ears, or they fell out by noon. Arthur showed her by doing the right side and letting her do the left, which initially listed 12 degrees off-center, and which Lily wore with the unperturbed dignity of a person for whom the world's opinion of her pigtails is not a concern of any significance. She learned that Arthur drank his coffee black in the morning and with exactly 1 spoon of sugar in the afternoon. She learned that he read to Lily every night, and that Lily's current book was a battered copy of Charlotte's Web which they were on the 3rd reread of and which Arthur could not get through without needing to pause, very briefly, at the end, a fact which Lily accepted and accommodated with the generous patience she showed toward all the people she loved. Eleanor came to one of these readings on a Wednesday evening when she'd come by on the pretext of dropping off some papers, an excuse they both understood as an excuse, and she sat in the doorway of Lily's room and listened to Arthur read about sacrifice and about love that doesn't advertise itself, and she thought about a silver locket and a hospital bathroom and the specific, irrevocable nature of the choices we make when we have nothing left but the choice. She thought, he is the best thing that happened to her. And then, slightly more quietly, a thought she was not ready to look at directly. What is he becoming to me? She didn't see it coming. That was the part that haunted her afterward, the professional arrogance of it, the assumption that she had managed Marcus sufficiently, that a man who had been publicly humiliated and legally charged and stripped of everything he had considered his due would absorb the experience and withdraw. She had underestimated his spite. It was a Friday evening in early October, the air sharpening toward the cold of the coming season, when Lily's preschool called to say that her babysitter, Mrs. Garrity, whose hip had been troubling her, had not arrived at the scheduled pickup time, and could someone come immediately. Arthur was in a second interview for a new position, across town, his phone on silent. Eleanor, whose number was now in the school's emergency contacts because of a quiet, practical conversation she and Arthur had had 3 weeks prior, went. She picked Lily up and was walking the 4 blocks back to the apartment, Lily's hand in hers, Lily chattering with the inexhaustible energy of a child who has been in school and therefore contained for 7 hours, when she heard the footsteps. She registered them before she registered anything else, a sound from the right, too quick for ordinary pedestrian movement. She turned, pulling Lily instinctively behind her, and there was Marcus Thorne, and beside him a man she didn't know, large, and with the specific quality of stillness that professional bullies project before they move. Marcus looked terrible. He had aged 10 years and 6 weeks. Thinner, the silver-haired polish entirely gone, replaced by the haggard, unkempt look of a man who has stopped being able to maintain his image and resents it enormously. His eyes were bright with the specific brightness of sustained grievance. "There she is," he said, "Eleanor Vance." He looked at Lily with an expression that was trying to be neutral and was not succeeding. "Who's the kid?" "Walk away, Marcus," Eleanor said. Her voice was completely level. It was not bravado. She was, in truth, frightened, a sensation she so rarely experienced that for a moment she almost didn't recognize it. "You are making your situation significantly worse." "My situation?" He laughed briefly. "You destroyed my career, Eleanor. 15 years. You publicly humiliated me in front of. I publicly corrected a record that you had falsified," she said, "in front of people who had been working under a man who was stealing from them. The humiliation was proportionate." The large man moved, not toward Eleanor, toward Lily, almost casually, as though simply cutting off their exit path. He did not get there, because Arthur Pendleton came around the corner. He had finished his interview early. He had tried Eleanor's phone without getting through. The signal on the block was intermittent, and then had tried the school, and had been walking fast for 4 blocks. And he came around that corner with the eyes of a man who has done the arithmetic in the 30 seconds since the school told him Lily was with Eleanor and has arrived at the answer not fast enough. He saw the large man. He saw the angle. He moved. He put himself between the large man and Lily with no drama and no hesitation, in the flat, instinctive way of a person for whom a certain category of decision does not require conscious thought. And he looked at Marcus. "You need to go," he said. His voice was quiet. Quieter, Eleanor thought, than anger usually makes a person. But this was a different kind of quiet, the stillness of absolute resolution. Marcus looked at him. "Pendleton." "Yeah." Arthur kept his eyes on both men. His hand had gone back behind him, and Lily, without being told, had moved to hold it. "Take your friend and go." The large man looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Arthur. There was a quality in Arthur's stillness that was reading, Eleanor suspected, as something more consequential than it should have by the purely physical accounting. Because size was not what filled the space Arthur was occupying in that moment. It was something else. Density. Certainty. Marcus's nerve, which had been operating on grievance rather than substance, made its decision. "This isn't over," he said to Eleanor. Actually, said a voice from the far end of the block, it is. Two of Eleanor's security detail, who had been 1 minute behind her since she'd left the office, as they always were, as she had apparently forgotten in the domesticity of the last several weeks, came around the corner at a practiced pace. One of them was already on his phone. Marcus and his companion were detained calmly, professionally, and with the comprehensive documentation that would prove useful to the police report filed that evening and the additional charges it would enable in the existing case. Eleanor stood on the sidewalk after they were gone and looked at Arthur. Lily had her face pressed to Arthur's side and her arms wrapped around his waist, and was holding on with the concentrated grip of a child who has understood that something frightening just happened and is processing it in the safest available way. Arthur's hand rested on her back, steady and circular. He looked at Eleanor across the top of Lily's head. "Are you all right?" he asked. She was used to being asked this question in certain kinds of ways, after high-pressure negotiations, after media crises, in the formal tones of an assistant performing due diligence. She was not used to it asked like this. Simply, just the two words. "I think so," she said. He looked at her for a moment, and his expression was, for once, entirely readable. Not guarded, not careful, something open and direct that she didn't have a clean category for. "Good," he said quietly, and then, after a pause, with the specific deliberateness of a man who is making a decision, "Come inside. I'll make tea." She thought, later, much later, in the quiet of her apartment, about what it felt like to be in danger and to have someone step in front of it. She had been powerful, independently, for a very long time. She had managed threats with money and lawyers and security teams. She had not, in more years than she could count, stood on a street corner with a frightened child and been protected by a man who chose to put himself between her and harm with no particular calculation, simply because she and the child were the things worth standing in front of. It was, she thought, the most frightening thing that had happened to her that day. Not frightening in the way Marcus was frightening. Frightening in the other way. The way that things are frightening when they matter. The first snow of November fell on a Saturday. It came in the night, silently, the kind of snow that operates without fanfare, that arrives while the world is sleeping and is simply there when the world wakes up, complete and transforming. By morning the Kinslow district was white, and when Eleanor looked out the window of the apartment from the kitchen, where she was standing at the counter attempting to make crepes for the first time, the world had a soft and particular beauty that she had forgotten, or perhaps had never fully registered before now. "You're supposed to swirl it," said Lily, from her stool at the counter, watching Eleanor's technique with the evaluative air that was her natural resting expression. "I am swirling it. Daddy swirls it differently." "I know," Eleanor said. "Your daddy is significantly better at this than me." Lily appeared to consider whether to be comforting or honest. "You're getting better," she said, landing on kindness with the assured ease of a child who has always received it. "You made good snickerdoodles last week. One batch. The first batch was a disaster. But you tried again," Lily said. "That's what matters." She tilted her head, and the movement was so precisely, achingly like. Eleanor pressed the pan handle a little more firmly. "Daddy says the trying is the important part, not getting it right." "Your daddy," Eleanor said carefully, "is a very wise person." "I know." Lily's voice was matter-of-fact about this in the way that children are matter-of-fact about facts. "He's the best." A pause. "You're nice too, though." Eleanor looked down at the half-formed crepe in the pan. She said, very quietly, "Thank you, Lily." Arthur came in from the hallway in his weekend clothes, a gray sweater with a small hole at the left cuff that he hadn't gotten around to mending, which Eleanor had become extremely familiar with in the way one becomes familiar with the comfortable textures of a life one has slowly, permission by permission, been invited into, and took in the scene at the counter with the contained, warm attentiveness that was simply the way he moved through rooms that contained his daughter. "Snow," he said. "Snow." Lily was off the stool and at the window before the word finished. "After breakfast," Arthur said. "How long is breakfast?" "Depends how long it takes Eleanor to finish swirling." Eleanor turned from the stove with a look that was attempting to be severe and was not. Arthur was already at the coffee maker, his back to her, and she could see, from the set of his shoulders, that he was smiling. This was the thing she had not expected. How ordinary it was. How it had begun. The Sundays, the Wednesday evenings, the the gradually widening circle of shared domestic time, with the quality of a careful negotiation full of subtext and distance and the awareness of what they were to each other and what they were not. And how, at some point she could not precisely identify. A Tuesday morning, a rainy afternoon, a particularly bad snickerdoodle, a quiet reading in a child's bedroom. The subtext had simply receded. And what was left was this: a kitchen, a Saturday, snow, crepes of arguable quality, and the specific, unhurried ease of people who have decided to be present. It was Lily's 6th birthday. The party was at 2 o'clock, and it was not large. 8 children from Lily's preschool and their parents. Mrs. Garrity with her repaired hip and her good navy dress. The couple from the 2nd floor who had been feeding Arthur's cat during the weeks of Lily's hospitalizations and had never been able to leave afterward because Lily had attached to them with the unself-conscious determination she brought to all her attachments. Streamers in yellow and white. A cake that Arthur had made. Chocolate, 2 layers, with a white swan piped in frosting on the top that he had spent 40 minutes getting right, alone in the kitchen at midnight, while Eleanor sat at the counter and washed with her hands around a mug of tea, because some things require witness. "The wing is crooked," he said. "It's beautiful," she said. He turned and looked at her. The kitchen was quiet. Lily was asleep down the hall. The cake was between them on the counter with its slightly asymmetrical swan, and outside the window the snow had started again, the fine, early winter kind, more feeling than fact. "Eleanor," he said. "Yes. I want to tell you something." He set down the piping bag. He turned to face her fully, leaning against the counter edge, and his expression was the open, direct one she had learned to recognize as his honest face. The one he didn't use in front of people he was managing his distance from. "I've been thinking about what this has been. These weeks. What you've become to Lily. He paused. What you've become to me." She held very still. "I know it's complicated," he said. "I know the history between us is not simple. And I know you didn't come into our lives under circumstances that anyone would call romantic." He said the word plainly, without flinching from it. "But you're here, and you keep coming back. And I've stopped trying to categorize it and started just seeing it for what it is." "What is it?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment, in the quiet kitchen, with the snow outside and the sleeping child down the hall. "I think you know," he said. She did. She had known, perhaps, since a rainy waiting room and a confession that had cracked them both open to the same shared air. She had known and had not pressed it because she was not, by history or temperament, a person who trusted herself with things she valued. She had broken the most important thing she'd ever held, once, and the lesson of it had been written deep. But she was here. She kept coming back. And this man, this patient, exhausted, extraordinary man who had taken everything she'd done to him and turned it, slowly, into something she could walk into on a Saturday morning and make bad crepes in, was looking at her with his whole, honest face. "I know," she said. He closed the distance between them the way he did most things, simply, without performance, as though it were the natural extension of a decision already made. And when he kissed her, it was not the dramatic collision she might have imagined, not charged with the weight of everything that had preceded it, but something gentler than that. The quality of a beginning that has been, quietly and carefully, a long time coming. At 2 o'clock, the party began, and was everything a 6-year-old's birthday party should be, which is to say it was chaotic and loud and covered in frosting by the final half hour. Lily wore her yellow dress, a new one, the same shade as the old, because some things should stay the same, and ran from guest to guest with the inexhaustible social energy of a person who genuinely cannot imagine that anyone present is not as delighted to be there as she is. When the cake was brought out, she sat at the head of the table with Arthur on her left and Eleanor on her right, and the candles were lit, and everyone sang, and Lily closed her eyes very tightly the way she always did, with the complete bodily commitment of a person who takes wishes seriously. She blew them out in one breath. "What did you wish for?" asked the boy from down the street. "You can't tell," Lily said firmly. Then she looked at Arthur, and then at Eleanor, and then at Arthur again. "But I think it might be coming true," she said, and smiled. After the guests had gone, after Mrs. Garrity had hugged everyone including Eleanor, which was the most surprised Eleanor had been in some time, and after the streamers were mostly down and the dishes mostly done and the remaining cake covered in the refrigerator, the 3 of them went to the park. The snow had stopped, The late afternoon light was the particular gold of early winter, low and long, lying across the white park in wide warm bands. Lily ran ahead of them down the path, her yellow coat a bright point against the snow, her breath visible in small clouds, the silver locket catching light at her throat. Eleanor walked beside Arthur. Their hands were in their respective pockets. After a moment, without discussion, his hand came out of his pocket and found hers. She looked down at their joined hands. She looked up at Lily, spinning in a circle in the middle of the path, arms out, face tilted to the sky with absolute, uncomplicated joy. "She's extraordinary," Eleanor said. The same words she'd said on a bench in September, but they were not the same sentence. They were larger now, inhabited differently, freighted with everything the weeks between had laid into them. "Yeah," Arthur said. His voice was the same as it had been then, warm, quiet, certain. "She is." The silver swan caught the afternoon light and threw it back in small, bright arcs as Lily spun. In the photograph on Arthur's desk, the one Eleanor had seen in the moment that changed everything, the one that had cracked open a life she'd sealed shut, the same locket had caught the same kind of light, in the hands of a girl who had not yet grown into herself. Here, Eleanor thought. She is here. She is fine. She is wonderful. And the long, cold room inside her chest, the one that had been locked since December of a year long past, the one that no amount of money or success or efficient precision had ever warmed, let in the afternoon light through a door that was, at last, all the way open. Behind them, their footprints ran back along the path. 2 adult sets of prints and 1 small, irregular set that zigzagged between them, crossing back and forth, making a single connected line. Lily turned around, running back toward them. "Mommy," she called, not the uncertain, instinctive whisper of an office doorway, but clear and full and chosen, a word that had found its shape and its weight and its permanent place in the world. "Daddy, look at the tracks. We made a family." Arthur squeezed Eleanor's hand. Eleanor Vance, who was not accustomed to crying, closed her eyes for one moment against the winter light and let herself. When she opened them, Lily had reached them and was pulling at both their hands with the firm and confident grip of a person who knows exactly where she is going. "Come on," Lily said. "The whole park is ours." And so it was. The silver swan locket hung at Lily Pendleton's throat for the rest of her life. On her first day of school and her graduation day. On the afternoon she was married, and the morning her own daughter was born. It was old by then, the silver worn soft at the edges, the engraving of the swan faded to a suggestion. But she always told the same story about it when people asked. "My mother put it around my neck when I was born," she would say. "So I would know, wherever I ended up, that someone loved me enough to let me go find what I needed." "And did you find it?" they would ask. "I found everything," she would say.